Okay, well, I think let's just kick off. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Rocio Paniagua, and I'm the Low Emission Vehicle Program Manager at Electronics Watch. I'm very pleased to be moderating this webinar today. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. Before we begin, I would like to present a few reminders. First of all, this session is being recorded. This is a multilingual webinar, so please click the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom window to select your preferred language, Spanish, English, or French. As well, if you need any technical assistance, please message Martina or Harriet from Electronics Watch directly in the chat. Also, kindly keep your microphone muted. And finally, this is more for our panelists and speakers. Please speak slowly and avoid acronyms so the interpreters can do their job. So before we started, I want to let you know a small change in today's program. Unfortunately, sorry, 1 second, I have something in my, yeah. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen technical reasons, we are not able to include the Democratic Republic of Congo case study as originally planned. So we sent an email a few days ago to all the people that registered to the webinar. But yes, we are very sorry for this change, but we are still excited to bring you an in-depth look at cooperative and artisanal miners in Bolivia with insights from our monitoring partner, CICEP, followed by a panel on transparency, payment practices, and their impact on miners' livelihood. And of course, the interpretation will be into English, French, and Spanish, as originally planned. The webinar is sponsored by the European Partnership for Responsible Minerals and the Barcelona City Council. And it is the last of a series of webinars we have been running since October 2022 about DRC and Bolivia. The goal of this project is to promote responsible mining and raise human rights standards, particularly through public procurement. So today we will focus on a topic that lies at the heart of artisanal and small-scale mining. This is it. The topic, the main themes are how miners are paid, by whom, and under what conditions. Payment systems are central to miners' livelihood, to how value it is distributed along the supply chain, and to whether practices are fair or exploitative for individuals and communities. We will hear about issues that directly affect miners' livelihoods and the fairness of trade. Our speakers today are Jesus Rea Campos. He is the Executive Director of the Centro de Investigación y Servicio Popular, CICEP, and Angela Huarachi, Technician of the Mining Department. Let me quickly just go through the program. First, we will start with an initial presentation of Jesus of about 15 minutes. After that, we will move into a panel discussion, and then we will open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. So please feel free to take notes and prepare your reflections. And finally, we will end with some short concluding remarks. So with that note, let me hand over to our first speaker, Jesus Rea Campos. Handila will share her screen, the slides for the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Well, yeah, it is still in the morning. Thank you for giving me the floor. I know the language are some barriers, but I will try to convey my information as clearly as possible. In Bolivia, shall I get started? Yes, you can. In Bolivia, there are three mining main actors, state mining, including extraction, concentration, and smelting, and private mining, which makes concentration and smelting, as well as small-scale mining activities based on extraction. We have yes, let's keep on this slide, please. The mining COPs in Bolivia are artisan and small-scale mining activities. The Bolivian state regulated it more than a decade ago through the Ley de Cooperativas Mineras. They are social, economic, self-managed activities, non-profit organizations. They give employment and they contribute to improving livelihood of its members. This makes that its members, the partners of these cooperatives, are at the same time the workers. There is no relationship between the company and the workers, the employees. They work with no distinction of gender, sex, or origin. This kind of mining is not based on obtaining a wage for their work, but the income are based on the selling of the odds they get. There's a process of purchase and sell of the products with the smelters and with other companies. That's why the importance of the fact that private mining does concentration and smelting, whilst the private companies do just extraction. The private mining need to work with the others, so the cycle, the logistic, the supply chain cycle until it is turned into a metal works. In Bolivia, there are between 50 and 60 cooperatives, mining cooperatives extracting tin, and they work in these mines between 15 and 20,000 miners. There are huge differences between COPs. Some have 300, 400 partners, and there are very little cooperatives with no more than 20 people at work with very low volumes. We are not talking of 300 tons per month and other volumes of 2 tons per month in very small activities. So there is a huge variability of productive capacity of each of them. The miners in these cooperatives work in groups called quadrillas, gangs, made of 4 to 10 miners. They do all the work, the mining work. It is important for what will come afterwards. The work, they discover the odds, they do perforations and blow the rocks, they select the rocks with sterile minerals, they extract it from the inside of the rock and they smash it so it can be sold to the smelters or concentrators of odds. Next slide, Endila, please. Thank you. Well, under these conditions in Bolivia, all the Bolivian market produces between 18 and 22 metric tons of tin. This has represented that Bolivia is ranking fourth or fifth tin producer with 10% of the worldwide tin, excluding China. China distortions a bit the analysis if we include the production of this country. However, it is important to highlight that whilst Bolivia is the sixth worldwide producer, the one coming after is Australia, that produced up to 90,000 tons of tin. If you look at the pie, that means 40% of this 22,000 tons. If we separated it by mining actor, the cooperatives produce up to 8.8 tons. That would be the production of the seventh or eighth production country, which is Australia. So it is important to analyze, to take into account what is happening in the tin mining produced by the mining cooperatives, because this production equivals to be amongst the 8 major producers of tin. So as in the pie, there are 2 main players: the central state, which covers the whole chain from extraction to smelting, turning the mineral from tin to metal. And as we can see, and there's a frame, we can see the exports, and in the exports you will see that there is the state exporting 68% and the private sector, which appears with 31.2. In the first pie, there is no extraction of mineral by the state, so there is a direct relationship between the cooperatives extracting minerals and the private sector that concentrates them and smelts them. And Dila, can we move to next slide? Then the Bolivian market. In this market, there are legal restrictions to exports of tin. It is important to mention we just can export metal of tin, which is different from the metal of tin made by the miners. These restrictions in exports of metallic tin has generated an oligopoly of the market with 2 smelters, the private owned and the state owned. They have the control of this tin in Bolivia, and from 2 companies that can smelter it and export it, this has made that the 2 of them can control the prices and manage the selling conditions. For instance, they better control the purchase prices through the price per ton of tin, and they set the assignation of quotas, of selling quotas to the cooperative. So this oligopoly makes the resources inefficient, where there could be an unfair distribution of the benefits. As you can see on the screen, there are many mining operations, a few traders, and the exporting units. As mentioned, the state includes 90% of state-owned mines. They represent 90% of its production, and 8.8 is bought from the cooperatives, whilst the private smelters buy 100% of their production through mining cooperatives. The next slide, please, Andila. Thank you. Through this point, well, there is a circuit of trading, and we think it is not fair in several cases. Before going on, I wanted to mention that as for the smelters, the main countries to which Bolivia is selling, the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, and China, and the United States. So the metals can get there. You have the shim. The mineral is pulverized in plants close to the mines. They go through a concentration process, which is the separation of a sterile material. This process is unavoidable because the purity has to be of 60 to 70%. So the tin mineral can be melted. To that, in the ingenious cold plants, we extract the other chemical components and the water, so this can happen. In other cases, the mineral gets out of the mine with a capacity of entering into the smelter. Through this journey, there is the process of purchase and selling, which is complex. There are different factors. There is the weight of the mineral, which is determined through a system of scales. Many times they are not too well adjusted. The cooperatives have different scales, the smelters and the concentrators, and the calibration can be a problem. After the weighting, we have to calculate the purity of the charge of the load of the mineral. There is a sampling process. We call it cuarteteo. We extract 3 tests of the mineral load, one for the purchaser, another one for the seller, and another a witness charge in case there are discrepancies regarding the purity of the samplings. They are brought to a lab which defines the level of concentration of purity of the mineral. They define the percentage of water of this mineral, the presence of other odds, as well as impurities. This step is important because with the level of purity multiplied by the weight of the mineral and the official quantization of the mineral, we can calculate the value of the mineral. And this factor, the humidity, well, we discount it. So the weighting plus the determination of the mineral low and the presence of moisture or others will determine the value of the mineral. However, it is important to mention that there are several actions that can be handled by the concentrators or the co-ops to elude the weights of the correct values, because this will determine the price. Within this process, what the labs do is relevant to determine the concentration, the value of the concentration of ores. Miners know very well the minerals. They can determine the value of concentration it includes. According to some conversations with them, the labs almost always present values which are lower than the one they should. So what has to be done is appealing to the state, the SENADECOM, the National Service of Registry and Trading of Minerals, which will decide whether through a third specialized lab this mineral load is the correct one. However, this process is too long, takes too much time, has to be paid by the seller, so the miner, and there is very little efficiency in the Bolivian government to do so. So the miners end up accepting the weight given by the labs, which are often linked to commercializers, to trading companies. Their practice is to increase the level of moisture, they wet the mineral load, or they reduce the level of concentration through the inclusion of sands. These factors will define the value of this mineral load. And there is a fourth value, which is the price per ton, which is a discount variable. Why is it important to talk about this? As the value of the mineral is depends on the international quantization or stock index. Well, this is defined on the fine pound, and the miners are selling So we have to deduct from the calculated value the cost incurred by the smelters to pass from tin mineral to metal, the smelting process. It is important because the miners do not know the calculation of this cost per ton. This cost per ton is determined by the companies according to some internal cost, and it is determined. This is converted into a mechanism of control or to generate conditions which are favorable. This cost is not rigid. We know that miners can negotiate a percentage of this cost per ton. So this can be verbally negotiated, and it is a flexible element that can be modified. I suggest that this includes benefit margins. The next one, please. In this process of transaction, we have to indicate in that in the mining is cyclic. The cotizations are not high or low. 36 months ago, we identify a huge problem when the prices are lower than standard, and the equilibrium point is not this now, but it is probably that it is likely that this could happen again when cotizations will be down. In some cases, the commercial transactions are done such as today, but nevertheless, the time where the concentration of the smelters will pay passes from 30 days to 3 months. It's a lot of time because we have to take into account that this delay in the payment, we have to add the time spent between extraction of mineral to the moment of commercialization. This time in large mines is between 1 to 2 months, and in the smaller ones, between 2 and 3 months. There are extreme cases where the miner doesn't receive a direct income for 5 to 6 months. To that, we have to add that the miners have to face the production cost. Generally, these production costs are via credits, and they include an interest for the use of capital. To be able to live, they take loans with high interest, and all this reduces their real profits, their real income they get. In Bolivia, in the last 2 days, there is an inflation process, very severe. Now, 38% of inflation in the last years. In January, we've got an inflation which is about 4% per month. So if a person in the day one received the payment for this transaction at the day 45 days after, plus the cost of the loan, and well, the income is less, the profit and the income is much less than when they are being paid by the smelters. A vital issue is the money of a transaction. All the mining transactions of tin are based on the value of the cotization established in set in dollars. All the changes are made in dollars, but the miners are paid in bolivianos. Until 18 months, it was not a problem. But when this crisis started, with a scarcity of dollars and plenty of inflation, there is a parallel market of dollars, and people started using the cryptocurrencies. This has given birth to a market of dollars, and exchange rate is fluctuating between 12 and 14 bolivianos per dollar. This implies that the miner, which has a fixed change rate of 6.6, the smelters can sell it for $1. There are two implications of that. On one hand, when they buy these inputs, 90% of this raw material comes from imports, which are bought in dollars. The miners have to pay up to 14 bolivianos per dollar to buy machines or devices. So the production costs have increased, and they are selling the smelters pay dollars at an official rate change, which which turns in a distortion of the market. It is also important to mention that this inflationary process and the depreciation of the Boliviano has made basic products of the family products to get higher. They are indexed according to the dollar, so they are perceiving less income. And finally, transparency in the smelting cost. As I told you, these costs are necessary for the transit of minerals to the market of tin. This is deducted of the estimated value we were talking in the beginning. This is logic, but this cost is shared by the extractors as well as the smelters. However, there is no structure of cost known by the miners. They just know the price which they will deduct. There are variable cost, fixed cost, which will be required, but also the levels of utilities of these processes are set. So we consider that this lack of transparency of the administration of the cost per ton can be hiding variables or conditions that might be unfair, so not in favor of the miners. So we consider that it was important that the smelters and concentrators should be more transparent as for the cost, and the miners could then trade in a better way. These issues, the next one, Endila, please.
Jesus, if you
Jesus.
don't mind starting to wrap up so we can move to the panel discussion, please.
Perfect, yes. This income deducted by an unfair trade originate several consequences. The self-exploitation. Miners want to increase their income working more hours, and they will be more exposed to natural hazards of minery. The miners will start reducing the unnecessary cost, and the first one will be personal safety. In a mine, you need to work with filters to cover the lungs. They will not do so. They will not use safety boots or all the PPEs. A third element, the cost of production. They will start requiring contracting external people to help them, and these will be young people who will do collateral damages then. And last but not least, cooperatives stop investing in safety in the mines. Another collateral effect, since the cooperatives have less resources, they will avoid the environmental responsibilities, accountabilities. and by doing so, this will occasionate effects towards the community in which the mining cooperative is running. This would be all. I'm sorry for having exceeded the time in 5 to 8 minutes. Thank you.
Don't worry at all. And thank you so much for a very comprehensive and detailed presentation. So I see that we have some questions in the chat, but we are going to move now to the panel discussion, and then we will have a chance to respond to the questions in the chat. So my first question is to Angela. So Jesus has explained how there are often discrepancies between cooperative and smelters in Bolivia regarding the mineral weight. So Angela, could you please explain us what are the main challenges miners face in this regard and how it affects them and what could be done to address this situation, please?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Well, there are discrepancies, as you said, regarding the cooperatives vis-a-vis the weight of the smelters, the determination of the price of the payment for the miners starts by the weight, always. And to that, there is this discrepancy. The miners want to have access to scales prior to selling the minerals, but most cooperatives, they do not have their own scales. The smelters do have them. In general terms, they are well maintained and calibrated. The commercializers, the trading companies, which are intermediary companies between cooperatives and smelters, they do have scales, but they generate a lack of confidence. Sometimes the weight doesn't match the weight of the smelters. The scales of the cooperatives do not have maintenance appropriate. Some trading companies, they calibrate these scales on their favor. They do it deliberately, so the reflected weight is less than the real one. When the miners give the minerals in sacks, there are other decreases in the weight. As for the weight, well, they deduct, well, the minerals are brought in sacks. These sacks are generally of a very thin material in plastic, which has a minimum weight, but in the deductions, they show a deduction of 500 grams to 1 kilograms, and that means that they get about $10 less. How does this affect the miners? Well, the income, as we said, rely directly on the weight, on the low, as well as their cotization. If we have a reduction in the weight, this means a reduction, so less income for the miners. This can generate, this can originate problems in the production for them, in the lesser capacity to produce this mineral, less capacity for buying raw material, the need of buying this raw material through credits, which augments the production cost for them, a compensation of lost income and for the stakeholders with longer days to produce the same. And there are also other repercussions since they get lower wages. They have less money for feeding their families in the reduction also of the expenditure in these personal protection equipment that they require for their work. And as for the state, less um, less taxes coming from the mining sites. And I think that the state should intervene because it is important that the state can have it is important that the state can report the right number of minerals because there are some taxes collected from these activities. This allows to regulate all the metrics in Bolivia. And although the state is doing its work, annual verification or when there are problems, I mean, they should be done in more regular basis. So they are not these decalibrations, this lack of calibration of the scales. Um, Dry port should be necessary to put in place. So all these goods could be measured so we could also solve problems between cooperatives with the smelters and the trading companies.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you very much. So I am going now to ask a question to Jesus, but I think it's very related to one of the questions that have been pasted in the chat. So my question is how is the mineral grade? When we talk about mineral grade, we talk about the purity of the mineral. How is it determined? For example, through laboratory procedures and with the involvement of governmental agencies. So, in your view, what works well in this process and what can be improved? So, and I am connecting this to the question in the chat because Sophia is asking, the income is determined by two factors, the weight and I think the other factor is the grade, the mineral purity. So maybe if you can also a bit expand on the issue of the purity of the mineral.
Yes, thank you. It is correct. The grade of the mineral is vital to determine its commercial value, and this is done through chemical labs. For the internal market, we use mainly the precipitation volumetry, which is the use of chemical reactives on the mineral load to determine its grade, the purity of this mineral load. But this is economic and there are many mistakes, calculation mistakes. It is less reliable than the spectrophotogrammetry, which is processed by absorption of radiation of tin atoms in flame. It is an international certified process. It is más costoso. The problem is that not all the labs are certified by the public authorities, like the one mentioned by our colleague. The instance, the organism that calculates all the metrics in Bolivia. There are also ISO norms in quality and all these parameters. And these difficulties in the labs united coupled with the fact that according to miners, normally they see they reduce 2 to 3% of the weight. If you report 50, they will tell you that the grade is of 48. If you multiply it by tons, this makes a high value of resources which are being lost. The problem is in the lack of certification, continuous certification of these processes used by the labs, as well for the internal transaction of the labs with the main trading companies to whom they sell the products. These comparisons should be solved by the Senatecom of the state. But as mentioned previously, the Senatecom in Oruro, well, they do not have more than 12 people. There are several ores. If we include it with the private and state-owned mines, there are very few employees. So these organizations are not efficient. Each day with a reduced number of employees who have to do the control at the borders. So basically the presence of the state in the trading process is unexisting. There should be improvement. The mineral market should be concentrated. They are disseminated in Oruro, in Potosi, where they are individually traded, but this should be concentrated in a unique market with a concentration of system of weighting. This could help reduce these inconsistencies, and the work of the state would be much more effective.
Thank you very much, Jesus. So we have talked about issues related to the purity of the mineral. We have talked about discrepancies between the weight of the mineral. And I want to discuss with you to understand better the issues related to the calculation method. So, as far as I understand, the calculation method that is used to value the mineral is defined by someone who defines it. And and related to that is whether the two parties, so miners and buyers, have a clear understanding of the cost structure of the transaction. Maybe if you can try to explain this, maybe Angela, in very simple terms for us to understand, because it's quite a technical aspect, but really important.
Yes, as we said before, the calculation method is based on the weight, the law of the minerals, and the international cotization exchange rate. In Bolivia, we use 15 days price set by the Ministry of Mining. Well, this also includes penalties due to impurities of the mineral, and as we said, there is a cost deducted by the separation of the mineral. In fact, the basic formula is simple. The weight by the law and the cotization. But what is complicated is that the cost by the separation or the purification of the mineral. So when we talk about price and law and production, well, there are the taxes between 3 to 6% that go to the state. And on this resulting value, the trading companies as well as the smelters, they charge for the cost of separation of the purification of the mineral as such. So this is known as cost per ton or maquila. And in some cases, apart from this cost, they charge for the impurities that have more difficulties in getting separated from the metal. this cost is defined. This cost deducted by the purification is unilaterally defined. The smelters or the trading companies can see it clearly. The cost can be less as for the smelters, but we do not know the structure of cost. And in the case of the trading companies, this cost is higher because obviously what they are doing is purifying it a little bit more, and they send it to the smelters. They are intermediaries. These variations can harm the partner, the miners, because she doesn't know the structure of the cost and how much he's charging. They are being charged for purification. But the lower the low of the mineral, the higher will be the cost, and vice versa. But there is no clear ruling on this. Some trading companies are charging more, others are charging less, and the higher the low is, the miners have the possibility to negotiate this percentage. If they are being charged 30 to 40% for purifying this mineral, they can negotiate until 15%. But this has to do with the knowledge of the miner of how he can calculate this percentage. Out of the maquila, which is being charged by the smelter or the trading company. If the low is high, they can negotiate, but when the low is low, they can say, no, you can take it home. We are not interested in this. So they must know that the trading companies have this margin to negotiate. It is much more difficult to get this negotiation. So this cost structure is unknown indeed, and we think that a more fair level of transaction should include a clarity. If there is this amount of laws, of specific laws, we should have this parameter for the smelters and the trading companies. And the weights should be certified by a third independent structure. In a certain way, the miners should be able to get information about the mineral markets and the projections for the future, because with this game of the future value of the mineral, well, they are using it in their favor. Because the dollar is weak, and this makes that the partners, even though they are getting the money in bolivianos, now they are getting much less than what they should get. As for payment deadlines, even though the terms are being respected, but these payments should be when the low is high as well as when the low is low. They are doing much more efforts to get the necessary incomes for their families.
Thank you very much, Angela, for a very thorough response. So, as we don't have a lot of time left, and I really want to open the floor for discussion from the audience, so I am going to read one of the questions that have been pasted in the chat, and if someone else have questions, please paste it. So this is for both of you, whoever wants to answer, Angela or Jesus. So I think we have been speaking about the issues related to the payment of minerals and the consequence that this has for the livelihood of miners. The question from Christina Ulrich is whether one of the consequences is child labor. So I guess from a broader context, whether these issues with payments can lead somehow to child labor. So whether you see some causality in that.
Well, in fact, we've visited the mines of Oruro and in Bolivia. We've been working for 10 years and there is much preoccupation to avoid the presence of children at work. In fact, we haven't found the presence of children, but this situation can lead to this. It is a mechanism which will lead to child labor before the legal age of 18. Why? Because Bolivian laws, as stated, makes that children can't work in the mines. But direct consequence of this unfair treatment is the deduction of safety in the mines and personal safety of people. And the miners are placed in conditions of more accidents or in more hazardous conditions. From January to July 25, a newspaper in Potosi made a follow-up of deaths in the mines, and in 6 months there were more than 60 killed, so mines are unsafe. And what happens in case of sick leaves? Well, they cannot hire someone to replace them because the law doesn't allow it, and necessarily a child of his or of her will need to get into the mine, and they might be not eligible. I mean, less than 18. So this scenario would do that possibly minors should enter to work into the mines. So it can be a consequence that we haven't seen so far, but the conditions are there. This is likely, and more when the price of the minerals are low. Now the prices are high, and that's why we haven't seen children and young people, but the conditions are here. Mines in Bolivia are up to 1,300 meters high in areas where there is no agriculture, and this could help not to have children.
Thank you very much, Jesus. So I don't have any more questions in the chat, but I have other questions that I had prepared for you and Angela. We don't have a lot of time left, so I will ask you our last question, and if you can keep it short, so then I can wrap up and close the webinar. So it's a question that could take us a long debate, but so we know that Bolivia is going through a challenging period because you have explained it so. And from your perspective, how is this context influencing the relationship and transactions between miners and smelters? Well, any of you, Jesus, if you want to answer, or Angela.
Oh, could you please rephrase it or just repeat it within
Yes,
the
yes.
Bolivian context? Thank you.
Yes, so Bolivia is going through a difficult, challenging period, as you explained in the presentation. So how is this affecting the
¿Cómo esto
transactions?
afecta las transacciones? Well, let me continue. There was a lapsus. We were talking both at the same time, I think. In Bolivia, in the last 18 months, we are living through an inflationary process, very complicated. Dollar is out of normal parameters. There is an inflationist situation with a lack of, there are distortions. The prices of everything, as well as mining transaction, are modified according to these changing, which are very strong. 8 days ago, 12 bolivianos per dollar. Now it is 14, and it goes up and down. And the economic players, the smelters, the miners, the trading companies, they tried to adjust quickly to this market. And it is very difficult for someone like the miners who live from the loans with the companies that provide the raw material. Well, the prices of the raw materials are being increased, but when the dollar is weak, the prices of the raw material don't go down. Since it is official transaction, it has to be transacted at 9.96. And the miners tried that the smelters pay a better price, but they are not achieving this. The Bolivians they receive are very few, and on the contrary, the prices of raw materials have been increased in more than 40%. On the other hand, the labs and the trading companies also adjust their prices because they need to do these transactions, and they try to deduce some percentage, some points to the grade of the minerals. This Bolivian context that will not change. We have two candidates, two people running for president, but both are thinking that the Boliviano has to fluctuate.
Yeah.
What will be a condition is that the exercises they are doing the calculations to reduce the value of commercialization, they will be maintained through time because the dollar will be flexible. So the transaction done in dollars has to be coupled to the payment in dollars, because otherwise the value received by the Bolivian miners, the real value they get will be less.
Thank you so much, Jesus. It is quite clear that the payment systems and all these issues are very technical issues, but they have a direct effect in miners' livelihoods and their families. So I think it's very, very important. The webinar we had today and understanding all of these technical issues is essential if we want to address and improve miners' livelihoods. So I just want to wrap up this webinar today. Thank you very much to our speakers, excellent speakers, and also for your contributions and your remarks, and to the audience for attending to this webinar today. Thank you so much.